Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Today's Business Leaders. I'm really excited about this episode. I've been running the show for 7, 8 years. I need to look back at the actual start dates I remember. But I'm really excited to have Barry on the show today. Barry Kleiman, he has just recently published a book called The Playground Principles. And one of the reasons why I started Today's Business Leaders is because I know and believe that it's really important for us to talk about the things that matter in life and business around leadership. I know that everything rises and falls on leadership. And Barry and I have been part of Brian Kurtz's Accelerator Mastermind for years and years together. So we've known each other, but this is something I'm really excited about talking about today. So welcome to the show, Barry.
Thank you, Gabe. Thanks for having me. Of course, it's exciting for me as well. And yeah, I've always enjoyed our rapport either way. So this will be fun, more one-on-one and so forth.
Yeah, I really enjoy having these conversations. And the reason I started this show years ago is because I feel like the more that we get to spend time with other people who have had different experiences and led other businesses and done things, that's an opportunity for us to learn. And I love sharing these conversations with my audience. And so I'm really excited to dive into this. And so to start, we were talking a little bit earlier before we hit record, and some of what you shared obviously makes sense. You've probably been writing this book your whole life, but when did the idea crystallize you to say, I've got to actually write this and get something out there?
It's a really good question, and frankly, it's I don't. The concept has been in my brain for years. You know, that in the book, I describe myself as a 74-year-old kid from a Philly playground.
Yeah.
In fact, just last night, I was watching. I'm trying to remember now exactly what it was, but Billy Joel special. And Billy talked just last night with my wife, and he talked about, his roots and all this sort of thing. But he moved to California for a while, and Billy's a New Yorker. And he said, ultimately, I had to get back to New York because somehow you can't ever lose where you're from.
Yeah.
And this was just last night. And I think that that's the genesis of this particular book. My whole life, I spent 50 years in executive search. My life, I joke with people. In fact, Ted Prodromo, who's one of our, members or compadres in Brian's group, Ted and I knew each other 25 years ago, but we just didn't realize it because he was working for a company where I placed a bunch of people. And when we got to know each other, it was like, oh my God. But I tell people, this was my LinkedIn. For anybody that doesn't know, this is a Rolodex. And this was filled with cards of companies and names and phone numbers and extensions, who was on what extension, whatever. So my whole career in life has been about connection, and not in the cliche sense. That's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
My that's how I made a living. That's how I developed friends and business colleagues long before LinkedIn was ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
So connection has always been at the heart of me. And finding ways to do it. But what I came to realize when I start to think about it and talk about it was it began all the way back in the playground.
Yeah.
I grew up in a Philadelphia row house. If for anybody doesn't know, at some point I could. Now they'd be called townhouses, but these were just walls on both sides connected to your neighbor. And I happen to live on the longest residential block in Philadelphia. And when you dribbled your ball down the driveway on a Saturday morning, all of a sudden window shades popped up, and within, I don't know, 30 minutes, you were playing basketball for the next 8 hours. And you learned, you learned how to connect with people. You learned how to get along with people. You learned rules. You learned what wasn't acceptable and what could be said, what shouldn't be said, how to say certain things, and on and on and on. And I think to answer your question, I was walking around Silverado Country Club, which is up in Napa Valley, not far. I live here in the Bay Area now, and I had just read. Um, I'll back up. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. Ever since I retired from Search, back in about 4 or 5 years ago, and being in Brian's group was kind of challenging for me because there's a lot of smart people in there who were well directed, yourself included, about starting agencies and copywriters and all these things. But I spent my whole career helping people figure out what the hell they wanted to be when they grew up, but I couldn't figure it out for myself,
Yeah.
and I just couldn't. I couldn't because anyway, long story short, and I had an epiphany walking around a golf course. I think I had just read one of Russell Brunson's books. And he said, I can't remember all the words, but you're either a guru, which I'm not. And ultimately, you know, I decided that what I really was a reporter and maybe a proselytizer, but about connection, because I think we had lost it. And of course, the internet made it worse, and social media made the internet worse in many ways as far as connection. And Brian has a phrase, which I'm going to say I didn't steal from him. I think the word networking is the devil's language, and I think the word connecting is it.
Yeah.
You and we didn't meet networking, right? We connected.
Yeah.
And I explain this to people all the time. So anyway, I realized, okay, that's what I really want to talk about when I grow up. And I'm not a connector, little cliche phrase, but I just think the word. And so I said to myself, well, how can I talk about it and make it tangible to people? And I realize it goes back to the playground.
Yeah.
And so I started to list all of the things that mattered to me, going back to my days in Search. And Gabe, I've placed people all over the world. I've been a basketball coach for 25 years. I've coached, I don't want to say all over the world, but Israel, Frankfurt, you name it.
Yeah.
But it all came down to this being able to connect mano a mano, one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and of course, those roots started back in the playground. So that was my way of positioning the ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make it whimsical, playground principles.
Yep.
um, and in the playground, if you preach, someone's going to say, "Shut the f up." So you
Exactly.
can't preach, right? That's
Yep.
not getting you anywhere. And so you find, I say all the time, coaching is finding a way in.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all these grease boards. You can draw all this stuff on them.
Yep.
Until somebody gets it, it doesn't matter. Coach Wooden said you haven't taught it till they've learned. And so all this stuff is resonating in my brain. And so I decided to take the playground and then use the same methodologies. Do you remember Sue Rice? Sue came on. She was on one of the Brian's broadcasts. She's a lovely woman who lives in France now, and she wrote a book called Tiny Thunders.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And Sue's book, I've gotten friendly with her over time, and Sue's book helped me write this book because, for better or worse, I learned to tell stories, and
Yeah.
I learned. Sue calls it or metaphoric storytelling, or using tiny thunders.
Mm-hmm.
This was just my nature, and
Yeah.
so Sue, in a way, validated for me because you know stuff that you don't even know, right?
Yep. That's for sure. We all do.
Right. So I didn't realize it. So Sue, in many ways, validated for me, and just for clarity, a playground principle is to make sure you give attribution to people. A
Mm-hmm.
fist bump, I call
Yeah.
it. It's if you think you did it on your own, then somebody will find very emphatic ways to tell you didn't.
That's right. You get
Right.
knocked.
So it makes sense. So all of these things start to I don't know, regurgitate or whatever you want to call it in my brain. And I began putting them together, anecdotal to playground principles.
Yeah.
In the book, there's a zillion attributions that I haven't, I don't even have any yet. Oh, yeah, okay. So here's a draft copy.
Yep.
But this artwork that's on the cover was drawn by a friend of mine and a mentor named Jay Samet. And Jay's been a TED Talk host, and he was the CEO of Sony Entertainment, and kind of a big deal, as it were. Well, anyway, he drew that. And as it turned out, and I bought one of his prints. That's the only print he was allowed to sell, because now he's in a gallery, and it's sitting in my living room. And I'm sitting one night thinking, okay, now you have the book. What's the cover going to be? This is
Yeah.
a true story. I looked up, and there on my living room wall were these Chucks, which were Jay's signature. Jay doesn't know if the ball is blown up or stuffed, by the way. He can't play basketball any more than you could probably play sitar or something. And he's 6'5", and he grew up in Philly, and he should be able to play camp. But anyway, I called him and I said, can I use this for the cover of my book? Because it's so anecdotal to inner city in a very elegant way.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. So I was connected with Jay,
Yeah.
and he let me use this thing, and it's just perfect. I came to realize that sneakers hanging over a wire, the word sneakers is a Philadelphia word. Anyway, so from writing the book, I had all these different subplots, but attribution, Sue Rice,
Mm-hmm.
Jay, somebody who threw you a good pass in the playground.
Yeah.
This is it, right? This is connection in real time. And to me, once again, I'm going on, I'm sorry, but this is the most important thing to me in our lives. Business, social, whatever you want to call it. And I decided that's what I would write about. And it came out as the playground principles. Long-winded answer to your question. I hope I got something
Yeah.
out of it.
No, I really like the depth that you go with things, Barry, because I've spent years, obviously as an entrepreneur, and that's a game that we play, right? It's a game that we get to make up a lot of the rules, and then there's also a lot of principles that if we pretend they're not there, we'll get knocked down, and we'll learn the principle is there regardless of if we want to acknowledge it. And I also spend a lot of time. My son will be 14 soon. My daughter's turning 21 soon, and it's like I realize like the world that they grew up in is so different than what I grew up in, and definitely different than what you grew up in. And I was reading a book about a month ago called The Anxious Generation.
Mm.
Really talks about how the advent of the internet and specifically social media has definitely damaged childhood. And they talk about, there's some ideas in the book of how can we counteract that, how can we change that. But a core kind of tenet inside the book is that because kids are growing up interacting through screens more than in person, they can just block somebody or disconnect or go away, or they can obviously, there's cyberbullying and there's all those things, but they don't actually have to deal with their decisions, what they say, their actions in the same way that you and I did as much. And so I think understanding what these things are and why they're a core piece of world society for, millennia, I think bringing this forward is one of the most crucial things we need to do in this time and space, because we've got to learn how to. Technology is not going anywhere. Social media is not going anywhere. All these things are forces that are here and are in permanence for a long time, if not forever. So coming back to understanding what are the core things that make us human, that make us be able to build relationship and connection. I think this is one of the most important topics we've ever covered on the podcast, honestly. And so I'm really excited to talk through this because there's you and I mean, you were in business and placed tons of people in different careers and coached basketball all around the world, and you've lived a lot of life. And I'm sure in your professional life you run into people that clearly didn't understand the rules of the game, the playground principles, and it makes everything hard. Whereas if we all can ground in some of these principles that are self-evident, they're going to be there regardless of if we believe they are or not. I think this is really important work, and that's why I'm really excited to go deeper in this.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when I wrote it, I'm like, am I just I think I somewhere, one of my rants, maybe it's in the preamble of the book. I don't even remember. I said, are these just the thoughts of some old man, kind of waxing about, his glory days as Springsteen talked about or whatever? And it's to your point, it's not, and but there's not, technology, however you just said it, is right. It's not going anywhere. And in fact,
Yeah, it'll be here forever.
and it's kind of
Yeah.
getting crazier every day with AI and all this sort of thing, right? And
Yeah.
But I've read several pieces about this now. The one of the greatest skills a person could have now and will continue to get better is the ability to do this, to connect one on one, because AI is going to be what AI is. But for
Yeah.
you to be able to talk about it to somebody in real time
Mm-hmm.
and present it in real time about how, unless you want a robot to do the speaking for you or whatever. On my LinkedIn profile at one point, I wrote that I was the anti-AI guy, and it's not that I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I do. I wrote a post for my LinkedIn Connections newsletter yesterday, and it was about Harpo Marx, and I'm a terrible. I was going to use an S word. I'm a horrible artist. I'm the world's worst Pictionary partner. I can't draw stick figures. Anyway, I asked, I can't remember what program, to sketch a picture of Harpo Marx for me. I'd be damned.
Pretty good.
Unbelievable, and so I get it. But, again, this is still important. And to your point about young people, my kids are older than yours, but I have grandkids, and I want them to be able to do this because, this matters. And again, the only thing I wrote personally in the book, all my book is stories and metaphors. Stephen Covey, Warren Buffett, I didn't want to take any credit for anything. Again, fist bump is
Yeah.
the world. But the quote that opens the book is, I think the world changed for the worse when we lost the meritocracy of the playground.
Yeah.
And the meritocracy of the playground is, show up. You got to make a play. You got
Yeah.
to get a rebound.
Yeah.
Claude or I don't even know all the names of
Yeah.
Claude could not get you a rebound.
Nope.
And that's what I think changed. And so that meritocracy also shows up in all these ways, right? And so I can't remember what your son is into, but whatever the sport is, whatever it's music, you still have to deliver.
Yep.
You still have to blow in the horn or pick the guitar or whatever it is, to
Yeah.
make it happen. And so anyway, that's why I wrote it. And of course, as an older person, I don't want us, humanity, to lose that sort of legacy. And so that's why I wrote it. But again, I never wanted to preach, Gabe, again. Preaching the playgrounds is a bad idea. So anyway, I could continue going on. But one thing I do want to say, ultimately, the book, and maybe this is the coach in me, I didn't realize this till a review. But ultimately, the book is a little bit of a challenge to people to, in fact, the subtitle, the playground principles, do yours still matter? Because to your point, we all had them.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
The golden rule is still the golden rule, right? Whether it's a Philadelphia asphalt playground basketball or a sandbox, or I talk later. Dr. Covey maybe never played; he had his own laboratories.
Yep.
But the principles, are the same, and so our ability to to use them really mattered. So one of the people who was a great mentor of mine is a woman named Dr. Edith Eger, a Holocaust survivor. She's the coolest person I've ever met. I was very fortunate to meet her in person. But one of my consulting questions was always, to clients when they complain, I said, well, okay, what do you want to happen? I'm not here to tell you what to be when you grow up. But
Yep.
maybe if we talk about it, we ask some questions and we get into dialogue. So that was always my question. And one day I was reading some of Dr. Egger's stuff, and that was her foundational question. But she followed up with three others. And I have now taken them, and they're in every chapter of the book, called The Four Questions.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends, I'm Jewish. One of my friends said, "Well, your book should be called the Playground Principles Haggadah, because the Passover holiday is about four questions. These
Gotcha.
are not the same, but what do you want to happen? Why do you want it to happen? What's the next step you're going to take to make it happen? And when will you take the step?"
Yeah, those are simple, powerful questions.
Duh, right? And so in the book, at the end of every chapter, I'll talk a Covey story or whatever. But then, okay, what do you want to happen? So I'm challenging people to take these principles and then ask them of themselves. What do you want to happen? Why do you want it to happen? Just because I don't care what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah.
It's none of my business, but I want you to care. I want your son to care. I want my kids to care. But the only way to do it, you should. But answer the question. So ultimately, the book became a challenge, anchored by Dr. Egger's questions, and I want to make sure that I give her a fist bump because she's
Yeah,
meant so much to me. Anyway, I'll
totally.
shut up.
No, this is exactly what I want to talk about. So yeah, inside of the book, obviously, I love the structure of it and all the stories and everything you have. What would you say are the top like two or three stories or principles that you want to highlight today? Because I know there's so much in there, and there's it's not the one principle, it's principles,
Yeah.
intention. But tell us one of the
Wow,
things that kind of got you going, or one of the stories like, oh, this has absolutely got to be in there because of this. Let's touch on some of this.
man. Um, I think um, I think that showing up, showing up.
Yeah,
Um, you don't just make a basket and think you're playing basketball, right? You
yeah,
got to show up, and so showing up every day and competing. You
hmm,
know this, Gabe. You're an entrepreneur,
yeah,
right? I mean, competing, and I'll take it one step further again because it was a playground principle. Compete, but don't cheat,
yeah,
right? Compete, but don't cheat. Play your ass off.
yep,
Beat the guy to the rebound. Get it chinned and find and then share the ball, attribution,
yep,
right? Um, and so those are two, and then and accountability,
hmm,
right? Because again, I don't need to rebound. I don't need to get loose. But I'm just come here and shoot, right?
yeah.
see,
That's
see, see how that plays out for you. In the playground, in business,
yeah,
in your marriage. I don't care, right? Because you know, um, I equated this at one point. I don't know if it's in the book or whatever, but gravity's undefeated,
yep,
right? And human nature is undefeated. It's not going to. Human nature is human nature is human nature. I think I learned that quote once from maybe Jay Abraham. Because ultimately, Gabe, I could turn this into a marketing book. You're a marketer, I could
yep,
turn this into a marketing book, no problem,
yep,
right? No problem. But you know, to show up, to continue to compete, right? And be the same person all the time, and if you f up with respect to your podcast, if this was a Philly podcast, I'd change the parlance, but be accountable. And
yeah,
I think we've lost that, right? In many ways, and it's just so much easier to be accountable. I wrote another book a few years ago called "How the Truth Will Set You and Your Career Free." I try to tell people the easiest thing to do in your job search is just be honest.
Yeah.
If you made a mistake, just talk about it as a mistake and play from there. My bad.
Yep.
So I think those, are it. And I'll say, um, just to add one more thing, I was sitting in the dental chair well into the writing of the book, and I was really uncomfortable, as you usually are in a dentist chair.
Yes.
And I needed something in my brain to kind of change my mindset, and they're working on me, and I finally say, okay, pick a word, get out of this funk, and the word I picked was rebound. Duh.
Yeah.
I don't know why it was. And then I needed to rebound from my mindset. And then all in the same time, and I wrote about this, back to accountability. I said, you idiot. There's not a chapter in your book about rebound. Back to your point about, what are some of the principles?
Yeah.
You trashed your leg a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Those pictures were gruesome.
It was pretty painful and uncomfortable for a
Oh
long
my, but
while.
right, but
Yeah,
you rebounded.
exactly.
You rebound, and not only did you rebound, you became a role model for your kids about rebounding.
Yeah.
Not this kind of rebounding, but that kind of rebound.
Yeah.
And I realized, and I wrote about it very graphically in the book, here I am, some guy's supposed to be writing about playground principles and coach basketball and all this and I left out rebound. How effing stupid could a guy be? And I literally wrote about it just like that in the book, and I didn't make it up. I didn't think about it till the dental chair.
Yeah.
So rebounding and being accountable to tie all that back together. I think, those are it. And if we all realize we have to rebound, Gabe
Mm.
Arnold 2 years ago had, more titanium than you know, than a tennis racket or what, golf clubs or whatever you want to say. And being accountable and competing and not cheating. I mean, if we all just live by those things. So anyway, that's it. I'm sorry to ramble, but I'm like the Rolling Stones. You start me up, I'll never stop, I guess.
No, I really like the depth, Barry, because the challenge we face across the board, not just for kids, but us adults and
Sure.
those of us years or decades into our careers, is we have such instantaneous access to volumes of information that it's easy to get lulled into thinking that information is valuable on its own, or we can trick ourselves into thinking that information is action. But having access to the world's, literally, we have the vast majority of the world's access at a whole different level than we did even 10 years ago with AI coming to mainstream. Information is not showing up. Information is not rebounding. Information is not holding yourself accountable. It's not, owning up to your mistakes. And so it's easy to get lost into thinking we have all this information. And I'll give you an example. In a
Please.
project I'm working on, me and my business partner met somebody that he's a great guy. I like him. I think he's well intentioned. But since we met, we've had a couple of meetings with him, and he wants to get involved in selling something and being a part of what we're doing. And so he went out and spent a bunch of time on AI and compiled all this research that he thinks is valuable and sends it back to us. And it's not that it's completely invaluable, but we explained in the beginning, we're looking for other distributors or partners or to sell and be a part of it. And so we've had a couple of calls, and my partner, if I remind him, the first step is you buy this equipment, you take this first step. Then the next step is you go out and you try to sell it. And you will probably fail, because when I try to sell something the first time, I usually don't know how to sell it. And then you keep trying, and so I get challenged and concerned and frustrated sometimes when people bring me information, and information is no longer that valuable. Experience, which comes from action and accountability and collaboration and connection, is really what moves the needle. And so we're in an age where we've got to come back exactly to these playground principles of first you got to show up. And to me, that means contribution, creation, playing the game, figuring out the problems, solving the problems, and doing something valuable. Because Information in today's era is not that valuable. And even I would venture to say 100 years ago, it would probably had more value, but information is just information. The people that actually did the work, fought the battles, played the games, created the things in the real world are the ones that are always going to make the greatest impact. And we're definitely in an era where it's easy to lean back and watch and read and absorb, but that can create, like, for lack of a better term, like a lot of mental and energetic stagnation and constipation, because it just
Yes.
having a ton of information is not the solution. Having an adequate amount of information to step up and show up and figure out what you're going to do is good. Like, we need coach, we need information, we need some guidance, we need a map, but that's not valuable on its own. And unfortunately, there's just there's not enough opportunities to celebrate failure, to go try, because my biggest successes, my biggest breakthroughs have come after hundreds, if not thousands, of failures. And so I think you're totally right. I think this stuff is really crucial, and finding a way to just show up a little bit differently, or show up a little bit more, or show up in a new space is actually how we grow. You and I both built businesses, and you've been in business for yourself a lot longer than I have, over the years, but you did show up every day, and I'm sure you failed a ton, and that's how you succeeded. That's the only way I know how to succeed, is out fail everybody. So
Yes, I mean, that Rolodex literally at one point gave when I finally computerized,
yeah,
finally, I had ACT. It was an early stage.
DRM. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, my ACT database had 8,400 names in it, and every single one of those people was someone I spoke to.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a LinkedIn, it wasn't
Connection.
a like. It was a real connection. And I want to add a word to what you said about this potential business partner, and how they showed up or didn't, or how they presented or whatever. Somewhere up here, yeah, here it is. I'm a huge Dr. Covey disciple. I mean, I ripped. The other way I describe myself in the book is a serial plagiarist. Brian
Like,
says I've invented nothing. I'm older than him, so I'm going to say I said it first, but it doesn't matter. Um, so I've stolen, borrowed, whatever from Dr. Covey, but his son wrote a book called Business at the Speed of Trust.
yep, it's a great book.
And when you build trust, from accountability, from showing up, from competing, from rebounding, from being there, saying my bad,
Mm-hmm.
because trust is, I don't want to take words from your mouth or put words in there, but that's the ultimate capital, right? When you can really trust somebody to deliver,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to show up. Yeah, they missed a shot, whatever shot we're talking
Yep.
about, right? But it's my bad, my accountable. I'll fix it.
Yep.
I'll fix it. I'll make it better, and do so, not just lip service. Again, that never played well on the playground.
Yeah.
Don't come the next day if you said you're going to fix it and don't, right?
Yep.
And so, again, we're saying the same thing, and what I endeavored to do with the book was to make it whimsical,
Mm-hmm.
not preach, but try one more time to find a way in, to take these basic tenets of business, of life, of marriage, of parenting, just bring them all under this heading of playground principles. And again, we all had different laboratories, as it were. Like my friend Jay,
Yep.
I adore Jay, and I feel very fortunate to have been quote unquote adopted by him. But he didn't play any freaking basketball.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean he doesn't understand the playground principles, and that's it. So it's not just me, basketball was my mistress. As I said, I've been married 46 years, and my wife is well aware of my mistress.
Yep.
But that's how I learned it. But there's many ways too. Um, so I did maybe in some ways separate a little bit because I called it playground. But I tried in the book to make it such that it's not just basketball; it's more the metaphor, for everything else, because it does show up in every other way. So you asked me a minute ago some of the more important principles. Did I answer your question, or did I just blab on too much?
No, you nailed it. That's those are the core principles inside of it, and it makes sense. Having known you as long as I have, that's really clear, and it comes down to like not only being brave enough to take action and try something, because when you first show up, if you're new in the neighborhood or new on the court, you're nobody knows, and you might not be any good, but still showing up and playing hard will give you an opportunity. I'm not the most talented or skilled at what I do. I know that. I know plenty of super talented people, and I'm happy for them. I just know that I can work really hard for a really long time, and eventually. And that's the great thing about life and business is a game has 60 minutes or whatever it has, then you got a shot and you make it or you don't. But life is actually a lot more forgiving than playing a game,
Yeah,
because you keep trying and keep getting better and keep learning. And so it's really about how we show up and our commitment to that, because like you said, we've all been around as kids and in professional circles, the hotshot that comes in and says they can do all this stuff, and they don't actually show up and they don't actually hold themselves accountable. And and nobody trusts them because they can't deliver. And I love what you said earlier. Trusting somebody is not trusting that they're going to be perfect and hit every shot.
right.
It's trusting that when they miss, they're going to make up for it and keep trying and correct it and get where they need to be. That's who I like working with. And it's definitely is about that trust. That, the term social capital is thrown around, but it really is rooted in trust. And I love that. I love that Covey book too. The speed of trust, because that's exactly what moves things forward. Is how much we trust people, and you only become trustworthy when you're battle tested, when you've played and lost, and when you've played and won, and when you keep showing up game after game and day after day. And I just think these are really timeless things that need to be re-injected and brought to the forefront across our societal spectrum, business life, politics, education, across the board. We're in a place where it's good to ground back into what works, because what I love about principles is principles are timeless and everlasting. And this conversation is relevant today. It's going to be relevant in 20 years and another 100 years and another 500 years. And that's why my intention and my practice is to ground my business and my life in principles. And that's why I was so excited to have this conversation with you, because these things will last on forever and ever and ever. And there are times to know about trends and tactics and technology, and I love all that stuff. But those are just the top layers. Anybody that's been successful and made an impact, helping a ton of people, making a ton of money, whatever it might be, they understand these principles and they do play by them in the long run if they want to be successful in the long run. Because you can take shortcuts and cheat, and then eventually everybody throws you off the court and they don't want anything to do with you. And you will get found out when you cheat. It doesn't matter. Eventually you will. So,
Eventually, it's interesting too. From a playground perspective, basketball, and I'm sure others, but because that's what I mostly know about. One of the things I did was I went around to, before I wrote the book as such, I polled a bunch of friends from all over, from New York, from Kansas City, from LA, Chicago, whatever.
yeah.
And I said, I want to write this book. Tell me some of the playground principles that were endemic to your playground.
Yeah.
And Gabe, so and some of these guys were NBA players, and my good friend Ray Scott, Coach Ray Scott, first African American Coach of the Year in the NBA. They're
Yeah.
all similar because they are principles,
Yep.
right? But what's interesting is almost every playground had a player or two who were better,
Mm-hmm.
but they stepped outside of certain other principles and wound up pushing the envelope too far, drugs, crime, because they were great, but they weren't maybe necessarily as great as they needed to be to kind of get to a certain zenith of that particular area. Let's say basketball.
Right.
And so drugs and crime and and so forth cut in, and there's playgrounds all across the country where you'll read these stories, and they're sad,
Hmm.
right? Springsteen sings about it. I had a friend who was a big baseball player back in high school, but all he talks about is glory days.
Yeah.
Because you have to continue to show up, because you can't rest on your laurels. And if you take that
Yep.
lesson of the playground and you apply it, like you're saying,
Hmm.
maybe you're not the most talented. I'm not going to argue with you about it because, I trust you, but I know no one's going to outwork you.
Yeah. I know that, and I know I
No,
can.
I'm saying, so I want you on my team, right?
Yeah.
That's to give me five Gabe Arnolds, and this is the point,
Hmm.
right? You know, um, you know, when I had a very dear friend who was a big time college basketball coach, he used to ask me to go watch games with him. And what do you think of this kid? What do you think of that kid? And I used to say, well, how he might fit into your team.
Yeah.
I want to look at him. Do I want to play with him?
Yeah.
Do I want him on my team? Because that was always my crucible, right?
Yeah.
Trust. Is that person going to deliver? Because you have people again who are comets,
Yep.
right? But they burn out.
Yes.
And we're in it, for the long haul, right? If that's the game you're playing, because again, one of the playground principles is ask, what game are you playing?
Yeah, exactly. And I know, and I love that question because I know I have friends that are very successful at chasing trends, and they're very hardworking and they play by the principles. And for me, that's not a game I play,
Sure,
but I know that that's the game they're playing. And so there's ways to do those things and chase the trends and be on the cutting edge. And
of
I have a
course.
friend who built the first NBA website, and he's so good at seeing what's next that he's just done that for the last 25 or 30 years now. And he's exceptionally hardworking, and I super trust him. And that's the game he plays. I'm not the way I'm made up and what I like and what I want. Like that question, like what do you want to happen?
Yes,
I don't want to chase the trend because it's just not who I am. I just like the slow and steady because I know how to win that way. Um, but then there's definitely people like you said, and like you're the basketball guy. I'm the hockey guy.
they're the
There's some
same game, by the way.
they're the same game
They're
almost
the
in a lot.
same game.
And so I've been watching hockey religiously for probably 10 years. Like I did as a kid off and on. But like last 10 years, I love the game. And so it's always fascinating to watch, the really hyped up rookie who comes in and he's got all this talent and everybody's excited about him. And then, 3, 4 years later, nobody wants him on their team because they don't have the work ethic. And then I watch the guy that's got a little bit of talent, but he shows up and he skates early and he works harder and he really shows up for his team in a big way. And those are the guys that make it all the way. They're not that flashy, but they just put in more reps and eventually everybody wants them on their team because they're great players to play with. And that's obviously how we build companies. It's how we build sports teams. It's how we build our friends and the connection and the people that we really want to be around our life is the people that are willing to work hard and show up and continue to earn their way in. Because I've realized recently, like the success I do have is I've earned it, and
Indeed.
I expect to earn the rest of it. Like you said, there's no like if I stop here and think, oh, I've arrived, that's a real fast way to slide backwards and get in your head and be kind of prideful about things. I have to earn what I have every day,
Every day.
and
Every
that's how
day.
I up because when I'm done working hard to earn it, then it's probably my time to check out on planet Earth. Like it'll be a long time later when I'm like, all right, I've done enough. Um, but yeah, it's that's how we got to show up. We got to earn it every day because it is the playground principles. If you were amazing yesterday on the court or on the rink, great. But today you still got to earn it. Like you might be able to slide a day or two, but if you think because you were great, at last week's game, nobody wants you around this week. So
It's so true. I'll make it anecdotal too to one more thing, and you're right, because it's business, yes, basketball. I have a very good friend who's um, estranged, whatever, from his kids.
mm,
Not as close as he wants to be.
yeah,
And I talked to him a lot about it. And he wrote to me just the other day. And he said, I read this article and I realized, I could do a better job and blah, blah, blah. I wrote them a note. I got this note back, and what do you think? And I said, I'm going to be careful not to mention any names. I said, I think it's great. I think you did amazing. But there's another issue now. Tomorrow.
Now you got to do it
Right?
again.
Because in the playground, in the book, I talk about this, and you just said it. Every day's a tryout.
Yep.
Every day's a trial. And you're right, Gabe. Maybe not every day,
But soon enough, pretty
but
close.
soon enough, right? And so I said to him, when are you going to write the next letter?
Yeah.
When are you going to write the next letter? Because you can't be a one-hit wonder.
Hmm.
We got people in our lives, musicians, Bruce Springsteen, the Rolling Stones. These dudes are ancient. They're older than me.
Still
And
showing
yet
up.
there are icons
Yeah.
because they continue to show up and produce and earn trust and so that's it, right? So every day is a trial, and when you get that in your brain, but we have on the internet right now, we have these gurus standing in front of with Rolexes on. I got my Apple Watch, and in front of Rolls Royce or jet airplanes, and this is what your kids and my kids are going to see.
Yeah.
This is not playground principles. Look, it's okay to have a jet.
Oh,
that's not my point.
right.
Right? But you get there by showing up, right? You
Yeah.
get there by showing up, and so this becomes back again. I mean, there's so many principles in there, but that tryout every day is such an important thing. But I'm afraid. I'm happy we're talking about it. I'm very honored to do this because I'm afraid if there are not enough, screw me, anybody could talk about it, but
Yeah.
if we don't have enough of these sorts of playground principles, that's my parlance. But if we don't have enough of them, we can get dragged in a very bad direction. And of course, as you know, it's fool's gold.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. So I could talk forever. I don't want to take a lot more of your time, but
I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. I've coached off and on over the years. I coached when my son was in baseball. That was a lot of fun. I coached that. And I coached soccer when I was in my early 20s. And so I've done a little bit, but no comparison to the time you have. And so that's why I want to hear your answer here. But you talk a lot about like preaching it is not the best path. And there's times to stand up and preach and say what you think. But if you really want to change somebody's life, you coach them. And so what do you think are maybe a story or an example or a principle around the coaching of where you took, because how we coach on the playing field is how we coach in life. I'm sure you've had players and athletes and coaches working with you, coaches that they just didn't get it. They didn't get the principle or didn't get the thing. And as a coach, then it's our job to try again. Because if I'm coaching you and you don't understand, I failed, not you. And so I'm sure at least I've run into coaching kids who didn't get it, and I just had to keep trying. But how do you view that situation when you're coaching somebody and it's not connecting and they're not seeing it? Like, what's your next step, or how do you view that situation? Because I always take that as that's my responsibility. If they don't understand that I'm not coaching effectively for them, even if it worked coaching this other person, if it's not working for them. So like, what's your approach when there's a principle or there's a thing that you need to pass on to them, but they're not getting it? I know you don't switch to preaching and lecturing because that doesn't work. Like, what's your path when you're stuck coaching?
It's a great question, and I said this before. Coaching is finding a way in.
Yeah.
And because you're different than Ted, who's different than so and so, who's different.
Yeah.
If you're adept at your craft, you come to realize that everybody learns differently.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Again, quote him often in the book, Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
Managing Oneself is a great book for everybody to read. And Drucker talks about how different people learn things in different ways. And
Hmm.
I would really recommend anybody, it's not a big book, but read that piece, whatever. But in either case, so I think the first thing we need to recognize is
Yeah.
that everybody learns different, and what's that expression, Gabe? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Exactly.
So I don't think that that's a way in. But of course, people do that.
Hmm.
To me, in answer to your question, that's not the most effective way. So I think you have to be a very skilled listener
Yeah.
to know your audience, and who you're trying to teach what to.
Hmm.
Um, I I laugh because I still resonate with the story, but because I told it not long ago, but um, we were playing in a competition, a national competition back in, that's a long time ago now, but we were getting our ass kicked in the very first game. And we had not played together before as a team. And it was just the first game of the competition. And our best player was kind of freaking out. And we were
Yeah.
losing. Oh, and by the way, he's a young man. We're timeout. I said, raise your hand if you're happy to be here. Because it was an honor, right? We're representing actually the Bay Area at that point in time.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you're happy to be here. This is our best player. And again, we're losing by 25.
Yeah.
And this one young man didn't raise his hand. I said, okay, you're out. And he looked at me like, but I'm your best player.
Doesn't matter.
So,
Yeah.
and by the way, we continued to get our ass kicked, and we wound up losing the game. So there's
Yeah.
no happy ending here. But in answer to your question, about 4 minutes later, he came over to me and he said, "Coach, I'm ready to go back in." I said, "I don't care if you're ready to go back in. Tell me when you're happy to be here."
Yeah.
And he walked away, and fine with me.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he came back to me and he said, "Coach, I'm happy to be here." I said, "Good. Go get so and so." And
Yeah.
years later, this is a true story. Years later, this friend of mine wound up as a head coach of I don't want to say too many names here because we'll
Yeah.
expose who the guy is or whatever. But a good friend of mine got a job at a Division I school. And as it turned out, this same young kid wound up going to that school. Complete coincidence.
Yeah.
And he knew that I knew the coach and he wanted to work for the coach. And he called me, "Can you help me?" I said, "I can, but what do you think I'm going to tell you right now? What do you think I'm going to ask you?" And so we got all sheepish and whatever. And we understood each other until one day I got a call and so the coach hired him as a grad assistant, whatever.
Yeah.
And one day the coach called me and he said, "What's up with so-and-so?" And I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "Do me a favor. Walk over to him and say, 'Hey, George, are you happy to be here?'" And so this is 10 years later, whatever, maybe 8, whatever, doesn't matter. And he said, "What does it mean?" I said, "Just ask him." And he called me back. He said, "What did I say?" He turned white as a ghost. And I told him the story. And so the point was, you try to find ways without calling anybody a name,
Yeah.
right? But try to make it metaphoric, right?
Mhm.
Or as Sue Rice would call it, bless Sue Rice's heart, a tiny thunder.
That's right.
That was an example of a tiny thunder, right? Are you
Yep.
happy to be here? So I think
Yep.
you listen, Gabe, and then you try to find ways that will last. Because
Yeah.
the game, I've lost so many freaking games as a coach in my life, whatever. I've won some too, of course, but
Yep.
but it's what happens afterwards, right? What's the bigger lesson? And so I think if you coach with that in mind,
Hmm.
not instant gratification, but you realize as a coach and as a friend, right?
Yep.
You and I were friends as a husband, as a father, grandfather, whatever, brother. I think if you take that view and you try to find ways to get it across like that, then everybody wins. Because you're going to lose games.
Absolutely.
You're going to lose deals, right, Gabe?
Oh yeah.
Uh, whatever. But are you? What's that expression? Are you throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
And so I think it. But you have to have that view, um,
Yep.
as a friend, as a leader, as a coach, as a parent, whatever. So I'll go back to Dr. Egger, and we'll leave it at that. What do you want to happen?
Yeah.
Right? What do you want to happen as a coach, one of those things? And that's why that question, I'll give myself a little credit because I did used to ask it all the time, but I expose it's my whole consulting model right now. Those four questions. So anybody wants to rip me off because that's it. And if you use that repeatedly, you won't go wrong unless you're full of crap. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll use it as a coach and answer. I hope that answered your question.
It does. And I think what you hit on there is so key is like you said and gave great example of you have to listen. And that's something that I've been paid attention to a lot more this year is listening is not just listening to what you're saying to me. It's observation. It's like really listening to what is the whole situation, like what makes this person tick, where are they stuck, what do they believe in, what do they not believe in, and being able. I love your story of like, are you happy to be here? And 10 years later, that still mattered. That means you coached effectively that day,
There,
and you would have had no idea that 10 years later that would have mattered or been significant or helpful. You listened and you addressed it then, and that's a great example of coaching that lasts a lifetime.
and you're also building a brand, right? It's like you're not going to
Yeah,
hold me captive because you're my best player.
right.
I,
Exactly.
I ain't just here to win this game. I mean, I want to win, but
Right.
not
There's more to it.
right, not at the risk of principles, right? Because
Yeah.
anyway. So, but again, I think we've lost them, and I hope conversations, Gabe, like this, which again is why I'm so honored to be on it, and
Yeah.
I'm honored that you took the time to go through the book, and I just hope we can computerize restart
Yes.
a little bit of our operating systems
Yeah.
and come
Absolutely.
back to these certain basic, look, read Dr. Covey, one of the greatest books. The only thing I don't like about Seven Habits is I didn't write it. These are so, Ray Dalio's principles. I mean,
Yeah.
it's it, and so I hope we can reinstitute them. And Gabe, I can only say that I'm so grateful our paths have crossed. I really am. And we've never physically hugged. We've never actually had a fist bump, but we've had plenty of them to know that we would have a great time breaking bread with one another. And I look forward certainly to that day.
Me too. Well, thank you so much, Barry. We will link down below in the show notes for everybody, but you can find The Playground Principles by Barry Kleiman on Amazon.
Oh,
I
thank you.
definitely encourage you to check that out because as much as we've talked about the challenges and things that we face in society, I also know, having read enough history, that everything's a cycle. And so us talking about this now is seeding, bringing these things back. And we don't swing out one direction without swinging back the other direction. That's life and that's business. And that's why these things are important to have conversations when it feels like some of this is lost. It's actually just a time to bring it forward and coach it more. And so that's what I encourage everybody to do is check out your book, read it, and also just write down your own playground principles. That's the point.
Absolutely.
So,
Mine do not have to be yours, but live your
exactly.
life by your principles is everything. And
Awesome.
that's so vital. So thank you, Gabe.
Yep. Thanks so much for being on, Barry. I appreciate you.
My pleasure.